Hello and welcome to Living a Culture of Life podcast by Human Life International. I'm your host, Colleen, and I'm joined today by Joshua Mercer from Catholic Vote. Welcome to the podcast, Joshua.
Well, it's actually quite an honor to be here. Human Life International has been a pro-life group, for decades. And Father Paul Marks is somebody near and dear to my heart. His nephew married into my family, so consider it, part of the greater Mercer family. So happy to be here, and obviously I'm so thankful to the late Father Marks' leadership and everyone else who's done such great work for Human Life International. So I'm proud to be on the program.
Well, thank you for being here. I've been following Catholic Vote's work for a while, and I've always been impressed by what you do. So this is a good time to have these important conversations. So today we're going to be talking about Catholic voting principles. And obviously a lot of people have questions going into this upcoming election. So I really hope that this podcast can answer their questions, help them understand what principles the church lays out for guiding voting, and then how to practically apply those in a messy world. So before we begin, could you just explain what Catholic Vote is, what you do, so our audience kind of knows your background?
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously, the joke always is the two things you shouldn't talk about in polite society are religion and politics. And so I work for Catholic Vote. I sometimes, when I check into a hotel, I just say, "Yeah, I have a podcast," right? No, I'm not. I'm pretty bold, so I'm not usually reserved on that stuff. But what we do at Catholic Vote, I mean, you would think, oh, you're just another political action committee. All you care about is elections and getting people, to vote and stuff like that. Yeah, that's obviously clearly an important thing about what we do. But for us at Catholic Vote, we understand that, in order to, the U.S. bishops are very clear about this. They say voting is a moral obligation. Those are their words, not mine. They say it's a moral obligation. Well, if voting is a moral obligation for us as Catholics, then we need to make sure that we are informed. And frankly, I just don't think that we can count on the corporate media to be honest and upfront. And I like to explain it this way. I was watching a marriage debate. This was years ago on CNN, and that was back when what's his face now, the British guy. Yes, I was watching the debate on CNN, and Piers Morgan wanted to have a debate. This is as the country was deciding whether or not we should radically transform our marriage laws to be something that it's not, which is to recognize people of the same sex as married couples. Totally crazy. We just accept it as normal now for the last 10 years. But they're having this debate on CNN, and he decides to bring on Susie Orman. Now, she's an anchor with CNBC. That's their business channel. And she's a very smart woman. She understands the business world very well. But she was on the program that day to try it because she is a woman involved in a same-sex relationship. And she was making the case that laws should be changed to recognize those relationships. I mean, I'm not surprised by that. I disagree with her, but respectfully, obviously. And then he also brought on someone who I would say is the best at explaining marriage. That was Ryan Anderson. I mean, I haven't found anybody else in the country who can explain the position on marriage as being a unique institution between one man and one woman is Ryan Anderson. But what Piers Morgan did during this debate, he had Susie Orman sitting next to him on the stage in front of a live audience. But Ryan Anderson was not provided the dignity to sit at the same table as a co-equal guest. He had Ryan Anderson sit in the front row of the audience, and that's how they argued. It was like, you're beneath me. It was as if Piers Morgan's thinking 40 years from now, when someone watches this show, they can be like, how could you have it'd be like a racial segregationist. They wanted to make the case that arguing for marriage was akin to making blacks drink out of separate fountains. And so that's how the corporate media looks at you, Colleen. That's how they look at us, And so that's the whole reason why Catholic Vote decided to embark on The Loop, which was this free daily email newsletter summarizing the news from a Catholic perspective, because there's so much information, there's so much news going on out there and you can't trust really 80-90% of it, And so we thought if we could actually provide the information, play it straight, just give it to me honest, call the balls and strikes, and then the Catholics will be a lot more informed. That's so much more important, actually. And if Catholics are really informed and know what's going on the issues, then I trust, yes, they'll do a lot better job of voting. But that you got to have that every day, that have that information, that news that people can trust. That's so important. That's so much a part of what we do at Catholic Vote.
Yeah, it's definitely important to know what's going on. And like, I mean, even just like working here, I learn a lot more of what's going on in the world that I never would hear otherwise because the media isn't covering it. And I like to joke that we're hitting like the audience that we're targeting is like conservatives who also care about world issues and attend, like, usually conservative programs will focus on what's going on in America because they're very pro America, which is good. And then the liberals tend to be the ones who are involved in social justice. So trying to like learn and educate people about that intersection of like what's going on with conservative life and family around the world. It's this
Right.
is
There's
the same
way
thing.
too few conservatives or traditionalists or pro-lifers who care about global affairs, and that's one of the reasons why HLI has been done such a good job. And of course, my friends up in New York at CFAM, they do a good job too at the UN, which is another important part. So you guys are fulfilling an important role.
So then jumping into Catholic voting principles, what principles does the church lay out to help guide Catholics as they're voting?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the biggest thing too is just to understand. I mean, obviously, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, when most of Christendom had kings,
Mhm.
it wasn't really that much of a question, right? I mean, you'd want the king to be virtuous, and you want the people to be virtuous, but people weren't entrusted with the political power as they are now.
Mhm.
Now that the power is invested in the people, the Catholic, the Catholic Church has gone to great efforts to explain, okay, how does this change things?
Mhm.
Um, and again, if you look in our catechism, it talks about the obligation to vote as well. It says in paragraph 2240, submission to authority and co-responsibility for the common good make it morally obligatory to pay taxes, to exercise the right to vote, and to defend one's own country. Defend one's country. I don't want to add an extra word there. Pardon me. Now, here's an interesting thing. Like, I was just talking actually with my kids. They had one of my kids had an assignment. He goes to Catholic school, and they were talking about the Bill of Rights, and all the rights that we have as Americans, and what a treasure. We have, obviously, the best known right is the right to free speech, but the right to freely assemble, so you can march down in Washington D.C. like we do for the March for Life.
Mhm.
There's also the right to religious freedom, which is crucial. The government can't tell you that you can't go to that church. You can't shut. We can start our own churches. We can start our own hospitals according to our own faith. That's a very important principle, one that's being attacked in many ways, many ways these days. Obviously, the right to defend yourself, and there's the Second Amendment, and that's also important. But we always talk about everything in the Constitution in terms of rights.
Mhm.
What I like about Catholic teaching is we talk about responsibilities. That's why that key passage from the Catechism: submission to authority and co-responsibility for the common good make it morally obligatory to pay taxes, to exercise the right to vote, and defend one's country. So what that means is we like to talk about rights a lot.
Mhm.
But I was explaining to my son, and the teacher was really good. They had a question like, okay, name something that would also help you understand what your duty would be. And I said, okay, we as Americans are proud of the fact that our Constitution enshrines the right for us to be tried by a jury of our peers.
Mhm.
So the government can't just say, "Oh, you're guilty. We're judge, jury, and executioner." No, 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 no. The government can arrest me, and then they can make their case why I'm a bad guy, but I still have a right to my trial for my jury. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means I also have, that's my right, but then my corresponding duty would be if I'm ever summoned for jury duty, my goodness, I have an obligation to do that. And we like to joke, oh gosh, I don't want to do it. Like, no, you have an obligation because if ever you were, on trial, you would want to make sure you had good people that were listening and making sure that justice is being served. So by that same notion, we have other obligations. And obviously, very clearly, we have an obligation as Catholics to participate in the public policy process. We have an obligation to be informed citizens of this country, and we have to vote. And the best thing you can do is to vote in every election. You get involved in the local level, get involved in primaries, find out like, it's kind of funny. One of the most interesting debates, I think, politically over the last 5 years has been over the libraries. Okay, so we have a situation where in both school and public libraries, we have books that are horrific. Now they're cartoons and they have words, and you're like, this is the kind of stuff you would find in pornographic magazines,
Mhm.
you know, but it's targeted towards children. And you would never have Playboy, Hustler, or any of these other magazines available in public libraries.
Mhm.
Well, so then why is it a book okay for a 7-year-old? So, in one sense, if you think about it, the fact that we're actually even debating whether or not we should have smut books available for kids in public and school libraries is a sign of decline, is a sign that this country has gone so far in a terrible direction. However, imagine how much worse it would be if the country's response to this was, so what? Who cares? Why do you care? The fact that there is a significant groundswell of people who are saying, no, this is not okay. We can't allow this. That is a good sign. And we at Catholic Vote, we had our whole program called Hide the Pride, where we encourage moms and dads to go to libraries to check these books out so that kids don't see them during the month of June when the rainbow jihad's going crazy. But the fact of the matter is, look, conservatives, pro-lifers kind of focus so much on the national scene that they forget about their own backyard. And
Mhm.
I would encourage Catholics to never, don't neglect either one.
Yeah.
In fact, you need to get involved in your local level. And one of my neighbors got involved on the local level. And what happened in my town, I live in a small rural town, but it's a resort town, so it's not super, conservative or whatever, because you got to be safe or whatever. But the fact is, enough parents and moms and dads protested about these books that our public library, which I can tell you is no conservative library, they said no more rainbow flag, and they put up the white flag. They said truce. We're neutral. We're not taking a stand. We're not going to do anything. And you know what? I'll take that as a win. That's a step in the right direction. So again, get involved in your local area as well. I would make that case because when you vote, you're not just voting for the guy at the top of the ticket. There's races from president, Senate, Congress, all the way down the level.
Yeah. We actually had the same library thing out here in Front Royal. There was a whole debate over the books in the schools, and I believe somebody wrote a letter to the editor of a newspaper around here, and they had a quote from one of the books, and the newspaper rejected the story because the quote was explicit. And they're like, "This is the point. Like, you won't even print this in the newspaper because of what is in this children's book,
But you're
but
going to
yet you
eight-year-olds check
can
it
name the
out?
book."
Right.
Exactly.
That's perfect. That's the
So,
best argument I've ever heard.
yeah. What issues do you think Catholics should be most concerned about, especially in this upcoming election?
Well, I mean, look, Pope Francis, I don't think, I've had my disagreements with him pretty strongly, but in general, I don't think it's makes a lot of sense for the Pope to try to weigh in on too many presidential elections on any level. Like, I wouldn't want him weighing in on things. I mean, he's from Argentina, so he's going to know the culture and the values there. But when he weighed in recently between Trump and Harris, I think it was ill advised. I mean, on the one hand, I was happy to hear that he criticize Harris for being pro-abortion, which she undoubtedly is. And Pope Francis has been clear during his entire pontificate that abortion is an evil. He said it's equivalent to hiring a hitman. And so he's been very clear about that. But he made it seem like there was an equivalency between him and Trump. Now, you can have reservations with Trump, but he tried to make it seem like him wanting to cast migrants and send them back home was akin to Harris's position on abortion. And it's like, for them to have been equivalent, it would be for a candidate to say he wants to kill millions of migrants every year. That's not what anyone's calling for. It's like, let's return, our social services in certain areas like Springfield, Ohio, are not equipped to be able to handle suddenly 20,000 Haitians in our schools and our healthcare. And just because we're a wealthy country doesn't mean we're a limitless ATM. In fact, have you seen what our deficit's going like? Like 10, 15 years from now, the number of people retiring, like it's an open question about whether or not this country can. I like to tell people, just because things have been going great doesn't mean it's always going to continue this way.
Mhm.
You still have to mind the table, mind your budget, and understand what's going on. So I think that was a dangerous false equivalency there. And if you'll notice, Colleen, a few days after that, the U.S. bishops came out with a statement clarifying it. They didn't directly throw shade on the Pope, as the young kids would say, but they made it quite clear that they considered abortion to it remains the preeminent issue in this country. And that's absolutely the case. But then again, it does raise questions about Donald Trump and his position on abortion now, doesn't it? Right?
Yeah. Yeah, we were putting together a ebook of Catholic voting principles, taking the U.S. bishops' faithful citizenship and then basically summarizing it into like a key ebook so people can go through it. And that was a big thing, was that abortion is the preeminent issue. And then I don't even think immigration made it into like the top like grave moral issues there. It was like
Well,
cloning
and in
babies,
fact,
IVF, and things like that.
I do think abortion. Okay, so obviously, I think abortion is the most important issue, and it remains that until we get
Mhm,
to a spot in our country where every child is protected in law. I mean, it's
mhm,
an absolutely atrocious moral evil. There are some times where I might say the number two issue might be something like the fight over marriage. Unfortunately, it's going to take it took 49 years for us to get after Roe v. Wade was forced upon the country. It took 49 years to finally get someone like Donald Trump elected, to get three people on the Supreme Court to allow us to overturn Roe v. Wade, just to allow the states to get involved and pass pro-life laws again. And
mhm,
we had over 20 states pass those pro-life laws. Unfortunately, we've seen a clawback on some of that, where pro-abortionists with a lot of money in the media and the culture on their side have been able to deceive voters in places like Ohio and Kansas. And we've lost some of that ground, which is unfortunate.
mhm,
But Kamala Harris, if elected, would make sure that every single one of those states, all 50 states, would have to become instantly pro abortion for all 9 months. And so all of the gains that we have in Texas, Florida, Idaho, all across the South and the West, it would be evaporated in an instant if Kamala Harris becomes president. So you can talk about Donald Trump being disappointing in several ways, and that I don't disagree necessarily, but I know that Kamala Harris would restore abortion in all 9 months to all 50 states, and that's something that we have to take pretty seriously, because they have made clear, and she reiterated this, that if they get a majority in the Senate, they will abolish the filibuster. Right now, the way the Senate rules work, you need 60 senators to get any major legislation passed. On budgetary issues, tax cuts and stuff like that, you can do like a slim majority, like 51, 49. But when it comes to actually changing the law, right, that requires 60 votes. You can filibuster just about anything if it's not purely a budget thing. And so her attempt to enshrine codify Roe v. Wade abortion all 9 months in all 50 states, she would just need 51 senators, because what she would do is to say, we're going to nuke the filibuster and we're going to get rid of it. And not only that, not only would she says it would only be for abortion. But Colleen, do we really think so? Because I have the feeling that after they do that, it'll only take a few months before they say, well, why don't we just do it for everything else and we can make DC a state? Like, you can't, once DC becomes a state with two Democratic senators forever, it's not like the Republicans come in and all of a sudden you're not a state anymore. Like, it would just be too wild. You know what I mean? And so I think they would try to pass a whole lot of stuff like the Green New Deal, which has these aspirations. Oh, this is so wonderful. We care about the environment and stuff like this. I can tell you, it basically would make every gas car engine illegal. Like, they're trying to do that in California by what is 2032 or 2035, I forget. You won't be able to purchase another gas vehicle. Now, people who are dealing with hurricanes in North Carolina and Florida know, hey, nothing beats gas. What do you plug in your car? The power's been down. There's 300,000 people without power. Right? They can't do that. But it's not just that. The Green New Deal would actually impoverish millions upon millions of Americans, because we're just not ready to switch completely from fossil fuels to renewable energies. That would impoverish a lot of people. It would bring widespread misery, hunger. It would transform the United States into Venezuela overnight. It would be terrible. So there's a lot of things that the Democrats would do if they got the Senate majority and Kamala Harris in power. So it's not nothing. But if you ask me what are the biggest issues, I would always say still abortion, of course. But in many ways, because it's because if you elect Trump, he says, I'm not going to pass a national ban, but Kamala Harris is going to try to pass a nationwide law.
mhm,
And some pro-lifers are upset about what he said on that, about not even trying for a nationwide ban. I got to say, technically,
mhm.
um, I could be elected Pope. I mean, I am an adult male Roman Catholic. It is possible. I have just about as much probability of being elected pope as the Detroit Tigers calling me up to see if I want to play for them. It's not going to happen. And so when it comes to federal legislation like an abortion ban, even if if Trump got elected and the Republicans won the Senate, Republicans are not inclined to nuke the filibuster, right? And even if they did, look, we might have 51 Republican senators in January, right? And we may have Trump as president. But guess what? We still have Lisa Murkowski out of Alaska. She's pro-abortion. We still have Susie Collins, the Republican out of Maine. She's pro-abortion. 49 guys are pro-life, but 2 are pro-abortion. The ability to actually pass this bill, like it's just not, you'd need like 62, 64 Republicans in the Senate. You would need the culture to change tremendously before you could ever try to pass that kind of legislation. So, you know, but that's one criticism of Trump I don't really honestly think is too fair, because and passing a national ban is actually just really not in the cards politically anyway. So criticizing him for not saying he would sign such a bill, I don't think that's fair. The thing I do think, though, is a fair critique is two things. Number one, the biggest one would be his support for IVF. And I consider that position to be unacceptable. When Donald Trump announced that very recently, it all came about because of this court case in Alabama. The court case in Alabama, for people who aren't familiar, but I'm sure your listeners are a little bit more familiar, it basically it wasn't really about the legality necessarily of IVF, because that wasn't really in question. It was about whether or not, like, what rights do these parents have, because the company, this fertility company, made a major screw up. And so there was an open question like, hey, wait a minute, what's the procedure here? What's the recourse for this mistake? And because Clarence Thomas had said something else in a federal opinion, like, hey, we should really question everything about what's going on here, then the media went bananas. And they said, wait a minute, could a conservative majority overdo everything, not just Roe v. Wade? Maybe the conservative majority would, I don't know, get rid of all the other privacy decisions that, like, for example, allowed for contraception and all this other kind of stuff. And it's like amazing to me that they would actually consider this. I mean, frankly, Justice Kennedy left the court in 2018 and we replaced him with Kavanaugh. And then obviously Ginsburg passed away and we replaced her with Barrett. I mean, that doesn't mean what this Supreme Court, it's not like they went back and said, hey, let's get rid of Obergefell now and let's allow states to actually pass marriage laws that are actually marriage. They haven't reversed that. So the idea that they would somehow reverse a ruling from 60 years ago on contraception, like it's fanciful. So I felt like the fear was way overblown. But the fact is, let's remember also what happened in 2012, right? Now, I've never liked Mitt Romney. I have never liked him. As an individual, I set up a political action committee that was like focused on one thing. Mitt Romney is a liberal. And I had a website dedicated to it, and when he was running for president back in 2008 and then also 12, I never liked him. I never trusted him. It just didn't, he never passed the smell test for me. He was a liberal. He was from Massachusetts. He tried to run more liberal than Teddy Kennedy, for crying out loud, back in 94. I never liked the guy and I never will. I mean, I'm not saying personally, I'm not trying to make this personal. I'm saying his policies. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure he's a nice neighbor. But during that 2012 campaign, okay, so here's the thing. We all remember when they passed Obamacare.
Yes.
And the bishops were inclined to support government involvement in healthcare and have more subsidies and help poor people get healthcare. However, the bishops were like, okay, yeah, I mean, we like this, but could you just just want one thing? Could you just insert language in here being very clear that this is not for abortion and just respect religious freedom and that kind of stuff? And then we'll totally support everything you're doing. And Barack Obama and the Democrats are like, yeah, no way. And here's the reason why they didn't do it. Because there was a court case in the 1980s, which actually, by the way, got overturned last year, thankfully. But the Chevron decision basically gives our bureaucracies the power. Once a law gets passed by Congress and it's super vague, then the bureaucrats go, yes. And they get to go in there and they get to establish all these rules and they get to fill in all the blanks. And that's exactly what they did with Obamacare. As soon as the ink was dry, the bureaucrats at the Department of Health and Human Services went into overdrive. And then it wasn't too much longer before all of a sudden we had the HHS mandate that forced every employer in the country to pay for abortifacients, contraception, and sterilizations. Exactly what the U.S. bishops were worried about. It's exactly what they wanted protection against. Mm-hmm. And the Democrats said no. And the bishops like, here we go. And so we had to fight that battle. And we fought it for years and years and years and years. And finally, the Supreme Court ruled in our favor. But of course, all the other companies that aren't religious in nature are having to pay for this stuff. And it's bad news, obviously, right? I mean, we should try to repeal all of it. But the fact of the matter is, when Mitt Romney was running for president, he was saying, we should restore religious liberty for people like EWTN, HLI, all these other organizations that have employees. They shouldn't have to pay for this kind of stuff. That's kind of obvious, right? Like, we should still have this First Amendment principle of religious freedom. What did Barack Obama and his willing accomplices in the media say to this? They said, Mitt Romney wants to ban contraception. Women rely on contraception. Why would he want to ban it? Now, listen, I know a lot of people at HLI listening to this program are just like me, consider contraception to be immoral. Mm-hmm. Of course, obviously. But the fact of the matter is, we're not debating that politically. There's no bill in Congress to ban it because, 85% of Americans think it's perfectly fine. Barack Obama was like, I can get reelected if I convince the American people that this guy's trying to ban contraception. And that's why Mitt Romney's like, no, I'm not trying to ban it. So there's a complete media distortion about that. And that's precisely why when Alabama was talking about this IVF case, Republicans were totally freaked out because they know that the media is a massive Death Star that can distort and lie every day with story after story. You and I both know this. We see what they've done on the abortion stuff, right? They talk about the woman from Texas. They talk about the lady from Indiana. Now the thing out of Georgia. They lie all the time. So we have to be extremely nimble and careful about how we argue about things because we know the media Death Star is going to come after us. Mm-hmm. And so that's the kind of lessons that Republicans have kind of learned. Now, on this case, I think J.D. Vance handled it a lot better than Donald Trump did. If you'll notice during the vice presidential debate, J.D. Vance talked about we need to make sure as we're debating this issue, we need to be humble. He didn't actually use that word, but that's basically what he was saying. We need to win back the trust of the American people. We need to convince them that the pro-life position is better, and we need to articulate it better. And we also need to be more supportive of these women and give them more economic opportunities, give them more help, find them daycare options, expand all these, maybe maternity leave. And he also talked about offering fertility treatments. Of course, we as Catholics totally support fertility treatments as long as they're actually moral. Yeah. And so there is that difference between us. And we make clear with regards to IVF, mm-hmm. Catholic vote, we have, we did endorse Donald Trump. And we do know people that work on the campaign. And as soon as that came down the pike, we contacted those guys right away and said, just so you know, we oppose this and we will strongly oppose it in the next Congress. We will fight it with everything we got. But the fact of the matter is we do know that Kamala Harris as president of the United States would be infinitely worse. And so we're still going to encourage Catholics to vote for you. But we're going to encourage Catholics to vote for you despite this, because we consider this position to be wrong. And we're going to still try to convince you and everyone else in Congress that this is a bad idea.
Yes. Well, it was interesting because, like I said, writing the ebook, I was going through the different principles, and abortion is the preeminent one. It's supposed to be the one that takes precedence over all the other issues for Catholic voters. And it sounds like with Catholic Vote endorsing Trump, you were applying that principle of he will accomplish more good for the pro-life movement than Kamala would, even if he does support abortion. So could you explain for our listeners who are still concerned about his abortion stance, why Catholic Vote thinks, what good things you think Trump, What good things Catholic Vote thinks that Trump will accomplish for pro-lifers?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, by the way, incidentally, um, Clarence Thomas was confirmed to the Supreme Court back in 1991. And then Samuel Alito was confirmed back in 2006. And even though there's a distance there of 15 years, those men are both only about 18 months apart. They're both actually getting up in age.
Mm-hmm.
And the next president might have the opportunity to fill one or both of those seats. And those two are giants of the court. It would be absolutely horrendous if they were replaced by two people that were like, Biden's appointee, Ketanji Brown Jackson. She doesn't even know what a woman is. So if you want to know, I mean, like what a disaster this court could be instantly if you suddenly a 6-3 majority, which is pretty decently solid, and it gets flipped around to being a 5-4 majority for the Democrats, that could be lights out for religious freedom. Immediately, the Dobbs decision is overturned. Any gains that we've made over the last few years on that are eviscerated. And I do worry for a lot of things. So on that alone, and you're like, well, can I trust Trump to pick good candidates for the Supreme Court? I mean, yeah, actually, he did put 3 people on the court, and you could wish that they were even more conservative than they were, but the fact of the matter is, we had a very tight Senate, 52-48, and getting Kavanaugh confirmed was tough, and having somebody even more conservative than him would have been nearly impossible. And obviously, Amy Coney Barrett was confirmed, and there was not that much time left. It's actually not that hard to think about this. Justice Ginsburg, if she would have lived 5 more months of her life, she would have been replaced by Joe Biden, because Joe Biden would have been president. I mean, it was that close. And so I like to tell people, like, we're always on the razor's edge here. The biggest argument, and obviously I think there's policy things too. It's not just the Supreme Court. I mean, President Trump, when he got into office, he, just like George W. Bush before him, just like, Ronald Reagan, he reinstituted the policy. I know you guys at HL, I know this well, where he said, we're going to stop this funny business of paying for abortions in our overseas, funding.
Mexico City
policy. That's right. But he actually enhanced it. He made it a little bit stronger. And he did the same thing with regards to other policies. And he came back to the pro-life groups and said, you helped get me elected. What is it you want? Can I make this better? And it was frankly surprising. Like, we were so used to Republicans like doing the very bare minimum. It was actually kind of astonishing for them to, for a Republican president to be like so supportive. Like, is there anything more that we can do on this? Mm-hmm. Like, that was actually refreshing. It's like, wait a minute, you're not just taking our votes for granted. And that's why I think institutionally, so, over the years, pro-life voters are so used to people when they, making nice promises, and then once they get to Washington, abandoning that. And the reason why, there's good reason for that. This is why I actually say, this is kind of controversial. George W. Bush talked about his faith a lot, and I believe him to be a good Christian. I think he goes to church every Sunday. I think Jesus did help him conquer his demons. He got rid of alcoholism. He was, then became, a good husband and dad. Mm-hmm. In many ways, you could say he was more pious as a person, than Donald Trump was. Donald Trump was a man, he's pretty open about like the vices that he had in his years, and he's not really super repentant of it, right? And it's kind of, as a person, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm voting for this guy. He's like, I don't know if I want him dating my daughter, obviously, right? So there's this disparity. But here's the thing. When it comes to accomplishments, George W. Bush, I like to remind every Catholic who can hear on this, when he ran for president in 2004, the big swing state wasn't Pennsylvania or Florida. It was actually Ohio. Mm-hmm. And Karl Rove was his, thinker and his campaign guy. And he said to George W. Bush, hey, look, the marriage issue is red hot in Ohio. And in fact, they're putting an amendment onto the state constitution to make marriage between a man and a woman. And that's going to drive a lot of turnout. All the Christian churches are going to say, you got to vote yes on this proposal to make sure that marriage stays between a man and woman. And Karl Rove knew something very smart. He knew if all these Christians came out and voted for marriage, chances are while they're there, they're also going to vote for George W. Bush, right? He says, you got to go to Ohio. You need to campaign and say, vote yes on this amendment and vote for George W. Bush. So Christians in Ohio did that. They came out, they voted for this amendment, and they also voted for George W. Bush. And what happened as soon as George W. Bush got elected president? I remember I was in Washington, D.C. I was ready for the inaugural. I was going to a party for an incoming senator, John Thune. And I was reading the newspaper. Back then, they used to have, for the kids listening, they used to actually have news printed on pieces of paper. It was amazing. And I know, 2005, so long ago. And the article wrote, it was a little insider stuff about the new administration. And one of the people in the Bush administration said that the president was not going to fight anymore for the marriage amendment. He had campaigned on it so strongly in September and October before the election. But now that the election's over, he gave up on it. In fact, Colleen, he said he was not even going to press the Senate to at least vote on it, which we kind of all knew the Senate would not get 2/3 vote for that. And to me, that struck me as that to me was an absolute abomination. Pro-life voters, pro-marriage voters, Catholic voters, Christian voters in Ohio voted for this guy, and he said he was going to do something on marriage. And then as soon as he got elected, he was talking about more wars in the Middle East, privatizing Social Security, and he didn't say anything about marriage. Donald Trump is actually the opposite, okay? He's a guy who, like, not exactly 100% on the issues. Like, he talks, to be honest, I still think we need to help convert him to being more of a Christian. He talks a little bit of the language, but like, to me, he's a work in progress, right? But the one thing about him, I'll say, unlike George W. Bush, who campaigned like a conservative and then governed like a liberal, Donald Trump is the first person in my lifetime who I voted for who ended up being more conservative when he was in office than when he campaigned as. So that alone is enough to make people go, now, wait a minute now. This guy, he got in there and he did a lot of things for us. And give an example, something that doesn't matter as much maybe to Catholics, but evangelical voters are really big on, Jerusalem should be the capital of Israel, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. And so when Donald Trump got elected, he was so happy that evangelicals voted for him. He goes, okay, so you want the capital moved to Jerusalem? And the evangelicals are like, yeah, I mean, we've asked this for every Republican for the last 30 years. He goes, oh, okay. And he just says, he made a proclamation. We recognize Jerusalem as the capital of the United States. And everyone was like, wait, what? You actually did what we asked? It was so amazing. It was just transformative. So on one hand, that he knows on the IVF, he's probably still going to fight for it. I don't think he's totally lying. But if we can convince him that there's a better policy and a better way to do this, maybe just pay for fertility treatments instead, that are morally acceptable. But the fact is, on so many other pro-life issues, he is definitely on our page. And that's why I'm going to vote. In fact, I already did vote for him. I voted early.
Well, I was going to say, because I know a lot of people say you can't vote for the lesser of two evils, but obviously Catholics aren't supposed to vote for any evil. And I've heard it described that instead you're supposed to vote for whoever is going to accomplish the greater good, which in practice turns out to be the same thing. But it sounds like the argument that you're making is that Trump will accomplish more of the greater good than obviously Kamala would. And so when people vote for him, they're not voting for him because of their abortion, because of his abortion stance, but because he's going to do the most good for the pro-life cause. And
right.
Kamala would be a disaster for Catholics and for the pro-life cause. So that sounds like the argument that you're trying to make here of what.
Yeah, and actually, I was like, there's a guy named Ed Feser. I think he says it's pronounced Feser. It looks like Fesser. He wrote a book on capital punishment. I thought was really good. He's made the point online that Trump is it's too much. You can't do it, and that's what he initially said about a month or two ago. And then he has since kind of revised his thinking. He says, well, look, I live in California. My vote's not going to matter anyway. Kamala's going to win California. But he recommended that Catholics in swing states, I live in Michigan. I can tell you my vote matters. And he said Catholics in swing states could make the prudential judgment that, okay, you can hold the nose and vote for him despite this bad policy. And then we fight it on the other side of the election. And that's actually, of course, what I'm going to do. But the only thing I would like to remind people about is that, so there's actually a very funny, what Ed Fesser was trying to get at was the idea that because we have a two-party system, and I actually love the two-party system. I'm one of the weird people that actually like it. But the point of a two-party system is that because if one of the ways that you can punish your side is
Mhm.
if they are too egregious, you say, well, then I'm not going to vote, and then the people are like, well, wait a minute, then your side's going to lose, and you're like, yeah, I know, I'm going to punish them. And look, I get that argument, and I want to be very respectful. Like some people get really mad on this either side of it. Like we all care about trying to protect babies. I respect people's opinions on this. I am not going to scream or shout. I'm not going to say any bad words on anyone. Look, I get it. We all have to make that judgment call. Ed Fazer says she's not going to win. Trump's not going to win California anyway, so I'm going to make a protest vote.
Mhm.
I respect him. I respect that. If he lived in Michigan and still did that, I would respect it. I would wish he wouldn't. But I can tell you, because right here in Michigan, we have well over 100,000 Muslims. We have probably the largest in the country. There's an area near just west of Detroit called Dearborn, where there's tens of thousands of Muslims. In fact, when Pope John Paul II visited Hamtramck, it used to be a very Polish city. When he visited Michigan back in 1987, now it's a majority Muslim city. Ironically enough, the Muslim mayor of that town endorsed Donald Trump. But for the most part, Muslim voters had been voted Democrat for the last 20 years as they become a bigger player on the scene. And they're kind of significant here in Michigan. They're also significant in Minnesota. But what's going on right now is Jill Stein is running for president as a Green Party candidate. Okay. She's not expected, obviously, at all to win. But there's a lot of Democrats, especially Muslims in Michigan, who are so upset at the Democratic Party because of what's going on in Gaza. They think that the Democratic Party is too pro-Israel and not pro-Gaza or pro-Palestinian enough. And so they are deciding to cast a protest vote in favor of Jill Stein in order to make sure Kamala Harris is defeated in Michigan and therefore doesn't get elected president. So they'll say, that's what you get for doing that. And they're doing it on purpose. I understand that. So pro-lifers are saying, well, that's exactly what we want to do. Yes, that's what we want to do. We want to deny the Republican candidate this time a victory for the same reason they're doing it in Michigan. Yes, that's exactly it. And I understand it. However, I would make the case that Democrats are able to do that much more easily than we are. And also on the Republican side, we could have tried something like that in maybe 1988, maybe 92, maybe 96. But 2024 does strike me as very different election for different reasons. And I've protested against people who said, oh, this is the most important election ever. Some people said that like in 2012, and I'm like, no. 2008 might have been the most important election in my lifetime. Maybe 2016, but 2008 probably was, because electing Obama was tragic. But people say, oh, it's immoral if you don't vote. No, stop it. You need to persuade people. Like, stop using this language of it's immoral to vote this way or that. Like, really use the arguments. The argument I would say with regards to this, I feel pro-lifers are saying, let's deny Trump. Some of these pro-lifers are saying, let's deny Trump a victory so that it'll punish the Republican Party and they'll get their lesson. And 4 years later, they'll know we better not do that again. I understand, and I very much respect that argument. The only reason I caution against that is we have experienced something completely new over these last 4 years. We have a government right now that has allowed hundreds of thousands, millions of people to come into this country illegally in a way we've never seen it before. 6, 8 times as much illegal immigration, and not just the illegal immigration, obviously, but they're bending the law in so many ways. Like with the Haitian crisis, they like to claim it's legal, but it's like it's just, instead of one at a time, they're just like yes, 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 20,000 times over. They're absolutely bending the law beyond any recognition. And so what we're seeing right now is in an attempt to completely change the country from underneath us. We are seeing, if they get another 4 years of this, I'm convinced that they're going to make the entire country as politically blue as California. And I do worry about that. And so like this idea that, oh, this guy's gone too far. Let's just shake the etch a sketch and start over in 4 years. We may not have the same country 4 years from now.
Mhm.
It may look completely different. And I can tell you, illegals are already trying to cast votes and ballots. Just imagine another 10 million across the country.
Mhm.
Imagine every swing state now is a blue state. So I very much caution against it. I understand it. I respect people like Lila Rose. I think she's a great woman. She's a hero to the pro-life cause. I would never say anything disparaging to her, but I just feel like her decision on this, I think it's just too risky. I think it's way too risky, and I'm not going to take that risk. And I encourage others to really commit it to prayer, because I know what I've seen this government do, and an open border means it's no border at all.
Well, I've also heard to that point that the primaries are really the place that pro-lifers need to be very, very strong in trying to get the most pro-life person elected. But then if pro-lifers like show up in the primaries, try really hard to get their person elected, really make their voice heard there, if they then turn around and don't show up for the general election, or they vote for a third party or don't vote at all, then they're showing that they're an unreliable voting bloc, which means that they're not going to be listened to as much. Do you think that that's a true assessment?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the other, I basically agree with that. But the other thing I would say is, like, look, we're pro-lifers are a majority of the voters in the Republican side of things, but we're not 100%. And that's why when, most of our lawmakers in the House, most of the House Republicans are pro-life. Not all of them, but almost all of them. And in the Senate, like I said, right now we have 49 Republican senators. 40, two are avowed pro-abortion, and like the other 46 or 7 are pretty solidly pro-life. That doesn't mean they're going to vote for every bill we want. They might kind of try to weasel it out or water it down. I get that, but at least they're not, siding with the other side, right?
Mhm.
Um, but the other thing I would like to say is there's a lot of other people that are in our coalition, people who are concerned about protecting their Second Amendment rights, right? You have people who are worried about their sons being sent off to foreign wars in the Ukraine or Israel.
Mhm.
You have people who are concerned about the transformation of our country with this wide open border,
Mhm.
and the crime that is being committed. And I'm not pinning all crime on immigrants. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying we have George Soros has done unspeakable horrors to this country by supporting district attorneys that just give the green light to every criminal, native and foreign. And so, you go into some of these cities like San Francisco and you see a Target, and everything is behind lock and key. And it's like, did I go to a foreign country? Is this not the United States of America?
Mhm.
This is what's happening. We're transforming. And by the way, this current government is so corrupt that they actually told local law enforcement agencies they had the option to report crime statistics to the FBI. Before, it was mandatory,
Mhm.
right? So when they say crime is down, they're like, hey, the reported crime, the crime that's reported to the FBI is down. That doesn't mean crime is actually down. It means we told New York and San Francisco and LA they don't have to report the crime anymore, so they didn't.
Mhm.
I mean, tell that to the person that got mugged. Oh, well, actually, that wasn't a crime because we didn't report it. Like, I'm sorry. Like, the guy took my wallet. Like, I don't. It's unconscionable. We have a government that is absolutely insane, and I would just say, as we're trying to work, you work in coalitions to get elected, and so somebody who maybe is Republican leaning, conservative leaning, if you ask them, what do you think of abortion? Like, I don't like abortion. Is it their main issue? Maybe not.
Mhm.
And you say, well, I'm really worried about Trump and IVF. And people are like, wait, what? Like, IVF has been the law of the land for decades, right? And like, well, he's trying to make it worse. And like, oh, well, okay, I'm not in favor of subsidies, so I guess, But if you say, well, I'm thinking about not voting for the guy and letting Kamala Harris get elected, they might be like, wait, what? You're not going to vote for Trump because of abortion? He gave you 3 justices that overturned Roe v. Wade. Now Texas has a pro-life law. Florida has a pro-life law. Georgia has a pro-life law. I mean, not just the small states like Idaho. We're talking some big population centers. And you're going to not vote for this guy? And so I am worried that other conservatives, other people in the coalition will be like, what is with the fair weather fan here?
Do
And
you
I respect them. I respect people who say, well, it's not, it's more important. I look, IVF, I get it. I get it.
do you think it's a Harris administration would go after pregnancy care centers and try to shut down pro-lifers from actually being able to change hearts and minds?
Well, actually, we know that she's against pro-life pregnancy centers. I mean, this is a woman who was once Attorney General in the state of California, and California had the worst laws. I mean, just I remember there's a thought amongst so many pro-lifers. If if cat if we could just convince American people and women that this was actually truly a baby and that the act of abortion was murder, then they would change their minds. We just had to make sure that, and actually, no, research indicates that that's not the case. In fact, a lot of the women who are getting abortions know actually that they are terminating the life of a baby. They know it, and they're still doing it for whatever reasons. I would like to tell people one of the best articles I've ever seen on this was by Paul Swope. He wrote an article for First Things calling abortion a failure to communicate. He wrote this in 1998, and it seems just as prescient as ever. I would encourage, it's still online. You can go look it up. Paul Swope, SWOPE, First Things, abortion, a failure to communicate. Women know that actually they're ending the life of a child. They just feel like this is their only option. And so we as Catholics, we as pro-lifers need to do a better job of trying to, create the infrastructure so that they know if they want to keep the baby, that we're right there to help them out and give them the support that they need.
Mhm. Okay, I have one more question just based a little bit more on HLI's mission. So, obviously, our affiliates around the world have to deal with the fact that organizations like USAID or federally funded organizations like International Planned Parenthood are pushing not just abortion, because obviously that depends on the funding for that depends on the Mexico City policy, but also pushing LGBTQ ideologies and
Yeah.
contraception and comprehensive sex ed. And I know that Trump wants to reduce the spending of the federal government. Do you think it's possible that he would be likely to listen to pro-lifers who want to stop federal funding going towards pushing woke ideologies in other countries?
Well, Donald Trump is very much against woke stuff, and so I think you would probably find favor with that.
Mhm.
Um, he's a little bit too pro LGBT tolerant on that kind of stuff. So he might say stuff like, if he believes media stuff about some African countries, he might say, well, you shouldn't make that illegal. You should be kind of a little bit more cool on that. So we're like, well, we may disagree with you on that. But in general, he's going to be against pushing radical Marxist woke ideologies. And in fact, that's a big concern of mine here in our own country.
Mhm.
And so certainly with regards to overseas policies, but I think some of the crazy woke DEI policies we have in this country are terribly catastrophic. I mean, we have, you know, Kamala Harris has even said that she thinks disaster relief from FEMA should be prioritized towards non-white people. Like, wait, what? I have to be in the back of the line. My house just got told, I don't get help because, and
Yeah.
she's given aid to farmers, and white farmers are in the back of the line. It's like, wait, that's not the way to change the policies, the bad policies from 70 years ago. That's not the no. That's not. You don't. That's unacceptable. So we should be better than that. We should have, rule of law, and the government should treat everyone fairly. So
Yeah. Well, I know that, like, for instance, like, depending on what people think of the Ukraine war, from what I was hearing from our affiliate in Ukraine, is that the money that the US is sending there is coming with strings attached of you have to support LGBTQ and you have to support abortion if you want this money. So that's kind of the things I was talking about
oh,
where
I
the
see. I
US.
wasn't familiar with it. That's terrible. I mean, it's obviously not a surprise.
Mhm.
Again, there's so many ways in which the government just sort of is not forthright with the American people. I mean, and you say, well, how is it that like the southern border is just left open for 3 years? Well, it's because they want it that way. And why are they making all these requirements on woke stuff or LGBT stuff for Ukraine? It's because they want it that way. But it's also, we haven't really had an honest discussion about why are we, like, I mean, look, I think Putin's a bad guy. I think he's a tyrant, dictator, whatever you call it. I don't think he was just freely elected. I think he's not good at all. And he suppresses free speech and the free press in Russia. I don't consider him an ally. Uh, Arm's length, of course, in every way. So I don't say that because I'm rah pro Putin. If anyone shows any skepticism towards a policy in Ukraine, you're like, oh, you're just a pro Putin ally. Like, what are you? Are you sniffing glue? No,
Mhm.
like, but of course, I think the reason why the war machine is in support of our efforts in Ukraine is because if we give a lot of money, a lot of arms and military support to Ukraine, then we'll just bleed the big Russian bear, and they'll have to expend a lot of money and manpower and machinery. And I think to myself, okay, I actually understand that. It's actually kind of a cynical, actually a very cynical argument. Is that really what's best for the people of Ukraine? I mean, if I lived in Ukraine, I wouldn't want to lose any of my territory. But if I said, well, wait a minute now, if I cut off this part at the top and just gave it to Russia and then refortified and got them to quit attacking us, maybe that would be worth, you know, maybe that would be worth doing. But everyone has this view that every bad guy is Hitler. And so if you cede some land, then obviously it's just like, the bargain we made with Hitler in Poland. Maybe, I guess. I don't really want to go to war with a nuclear power, though. So,
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this conversation today. It's been really good to discuss the different issues that are going into this election and just perspectives Catholics should have, and hopefully help them understand what Trump's actual position is on life issues versus what the Harris administration's position on life issues would be. So thank you very much for everything you're doing.
well, it was a pleasure to be with you, Colleen. Thank you so much for having me on your program.
And to all of our listeners, please like, follow, and subscribe. Check out the new ebooks we have coming out. I'll link the one with our voting principles with the summary of the bishop's voting principles in the description, so you can check that out and keep on living the culture of life. God bless.